Welcome to All the Remote Things. It's Tony back again, and I've got a really special episode today. I'm talking to a crew that I've had the pleasure of working with for the last 12 months on remote governance. And we've been creating and crafting and, shall we say, squabbling and having some opinions and doing all sorts of things to get to the point where we've created something that we think we'd like to share with you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the crew, starting with Farnaz. Would you like to let everybody know who you are?
Hi, Tony. I'm Farnaz Vahab, one of the Remote AF framework co-creators and relation system and organization coach. Very, very happy to be with you and your audience today.
Brilliant. I'm going to go sort of left to right on my screen for no other reason. So, Dave, would you like to introduce yourself?
This is the bit I always hate. Dave, I'm an enterprise and leadership coach, and I sort of help organisations do better by connecting with purpose.
Fantastic. And he loves long walks on the beach. Esther.
My name's Esther Derby. I am also one of the co-creators, and I care about making workplaces more humane.
Brilliant. And that brings us to James, and he's got a guest as well.
Hey, Tony. Hey, everybody. Speaking of being humane, this is Bailey. She's not even human. And I'm James McMenamin. So I work for a company called Elaborate, and I consult there trying to help organizations work better together. So working with leaders to design their organization and design the way they work with each other. And I've had a blast and really enjoyed and been rewarded working with this group of people over the last year or two. So I'm really happy to share it with everybody today.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I thought what I might do is just cover how this all came about. Obviously, so remote governance is something that Remote AF has had in its artillery for a while, and we've been working on it. When we were first bringing Remote AF together, we put together what we called a challenge group. And there was a bunch of individuals that we knew that would challenge what we'd put together. So we knew we weren't, off with the clouds and stuff. And one of those wonderful challenge people was the lovely Esther Derby. And as we started to talk through it, we realized that there was a bit of backwards and forwards with the model that Esther was created, which I'll get you to introduce in a moment, Esther. And so we started talking about it, and that's when the seed grew that we'd like to get a crew together of people that would like to be part of that governance. And so just talk a little bit about the seed model for me there, Esther.
Well, I developed the SEAM model a number of years ago, and I originally used it to help understand what was going on in organizations. And I have come to expand the way I use it since that time. It's a very useful model. It's a way of thinking about the concerns that exist in every organization, whether it's 5 people or 500,000 people, that have to be addressed for the organization to function in a healthy way. So these 3 sets of concerns have to do with steering. Where are we going? What kind of organization are we? How do we serve our customers? How do we treat our customers? How do we treat each other within our organization? How do we have financial responsibility? What kind of behavior is tolerated? Those are all steering. They have to do with, where are we going in the big sense of the word? The next domain or set of concerns is enhancing and enabling. And that has to do with creating the conditions so that the organization can meet its mission, which has to do with how things get prioritized, how teams are supported, and looking at the system as a whole and continuously making it better. And finally, the making domain, the set of concerns related to the people who are actually producing the products and services. And they need to attend to making the best use of their talents and making sure that any impediments that they're aware of are getting floated up to the system so that other people can help take care of them. And I find that thinking in these domains really helps people focus on having the organization function in a healthy way without focusing so much on hierarchy. So it doesn't get rid of the hierarchy. You can still have a hierarchy, but it focuses people's attention very, very differently. And they start focusing more on how can we get this all to work well together?
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think so. So when I heard you describe all of that and we were chatting through that, we'd already come up with the pillars of remote governance, which were transparency and information, systems of work, and data. And when we were working backwards and forwards, we could see that they linked together. So from there, we'll talk a bit deeper into how all these things work together as we go today. We thought this looks like something we could work on together. So I sent out this lovely invite to a couple of people who were interesting, and we had our first meeting and got this team together. And I thought it'd be interesting to explain to people why people wanted to get involved. So, for example, James, why did you want to get involved with this?
Oh, geez. Well, I found it really rewarding working with this group of people. I was excited to work with the people. I was pretty passionate about governance. I'd done some work previously to try to explore some practical advice around, if you're working with governance groups, whether it's a PMO or a leadership group or an executive group, how can you give them some practical advice that can help them just to improve their day-to-day approach to governance. And I've done a little bit of work where we'd created, say, transformations, or we tried to change the way the organizations worked. And what had wound up happening in some cases was people maintained all their old governance and then tried to go agile. And suddenly nobody had time to do any work anymore because they had twice as many meetings as they used to have. So for me, that's just a really simple example of where you've got suddenly two sets of governance, and people don't realize that if you're doing agile well, for want of a better phrase, then the meetings that you have day to day are governance meetings. So I was quite passionate about trying to get that message out to the community. Your stand up, your review, your retro, all of those sorts of meetings are governance meetings. And so if you're introducing them, you need to be removing other meetings. Otherwise, there's just too much overhead. So I'd found that I really wanted to do something about that. So those sort of practical aspects are really where I found my passion. And that's what we've been working through, trying to create a framework to address things like that throughout the organization ever since.
And who doesn't want more meetings, James? Seriously, come on. Yeah. Dave.
We have a meeting once a week, and I bloody
What about you, Dave? Tell us why you wanted to get involved.
Oh, I mean, who wouldn't want to be part of this super group? I mean, as James said, the people are awesome. But look, governance is such an important thing, and it's such a terribly misunderstood and often ignored thing. I can pretty much bet that half the people listening to this, as soon as you said the word governance, their eyes glazed over and they reached for the stop button. And seriously, people, stick with us. This is worth it. Governance is a really important part of organisations. It's not just your project steercos and things. It's how you do decision making throughout the whole organisation. And if you can do that better, then awesome.
And that leads me to the wonderful, and I point that way because it's on my screen, that's where Farnaz is, to the wonderful Farnaz, who, by the way, keeps us all on track. So very important part. But Farnaz, talk to us about why you wanted to get involved.
I think apart from having such an amazing group of people full of knowledge, experience, and wisdom, and happy to share, I was so excited about that one. And I felt that when I was working with the Remote AF team, we were part of our journey that we have created the framework or the modular patterns in a way that it was bringing bits and pieces together, and one big thing was missing. I think after working on operating model design, talking to middle-sized organization, we realized that governance is such a common problem across different companies and organizations. They might not all call it governance, they have different names and language to refer to those problems, but considering many organizations have gone through the agility pathway, regardless of what framework they are following, they have got to a point that they were not sure what is the right way of managing and governing their system of work. They had some ideas, but they were nothing tangible in the industry to help them to not be prescriptive at all, but give them the flexibility to work it in their context, in their organization, in their culture. And it was a good problem to solve. So that's why I got excited about it.
It's fantastic. And from my point of view, I got involved because I was the instigator to start with, but because it really was, governance is something dear to my heart, because I've seen it used and abused in organizations to create nothing less than strictures instead of structures, and just choke the life out of organizations. So for me, that was really, really important. What about you, Esther? When I approached you about this, what was it that said to you, I want to get involved with this?
Well, I think you've all touched on aspects of it. Governance at its essence is about helping the system function effectively and putting on some constraints that are actually enabling for the organization. And I really liked the idea of having a holistic view of that. That was part that really, really attracted me. And touching back onto something that Farnaz said, many organizations sort of reach this tipping point where they feel like, oh, we have to have some more structure, we have to have something. And the default is to go to this kind of heavyweight, very traditional, very locked down set of structures and policies and everything else. And I think this is an alternative to that can help keep a company in a self-organizing and creative, while also putting, enough constraints around things so that things function well.
That's probably a great segue into the other question I really wanted to ask, because when we got together, I think the first thing that we sort of looked at was, what really is governance? And I've heard facets from each of you around that, right? But it's really what is traditional governance versus what we deem as modern governance. So opportunity for conversation on that. What do you see as the main differences on that, James?
The main differences between traditional governance and modern governance.
Yeah.
So I guess what is governance is kind of how do you enact decisions or how do you make decisions that enact strategy for your organization? And if you go back to the very traditional, sort of Taylorist organizations where you're working through common patterns and you're trying to lean it out and make it as effective, as efficient as possible, then governance is really about making sure, hey, do this every time. We know this works really well, do this. And there's really good reasons to have governance which says don't go outside of these boundaries. But when you're working in different problem spaces, so complicated, complex problem spaces where you don't know what the problem is, let alone what the solution is yet, then saying just do this, well, we've been doing that and that hasn't solved these new problems, so we've got to try something else. So it's really saying, what is it that we must do in order to be successful or in order to be part of this organization? So rather than just having those shells, you want to be able to have some skeleton governance where you say, build off this. As long as you are doing these things, then whatever else you do will be appropriate, and we're keen to see what it becomes. So it's about taking different approaches to different types of problems, and it's about having an understanding that there are different types of problems in the organization, and you don't just have one type of governance across the whole of the organization.
Yeah. So building on that, Farnaz, you're hearing what James is saying, and I think we all agree with that. But there's the thing we also add to that. It's a bit more than just project management, right? Everybody sees that PMO or that project management as governance, but you could hear James talking about it as a system of work or totally. What's your thoughts on that for me?
I want to touch the part that when James was talking came to my head regarding, because as we explained, we started with the same model as the foundation for that. In the traditional way of governing the projects or systems, there were always just one group, selected group that they were in charge of governance. But the way that we have designed it, or we have spoken last year together about the governance, is about the governance is a practice that can happen in different level. It's a purpose. It's a way of showing that you care about where you spend your money, how you manage your people, and how you want to deliver. Is much broader than one person or 10 people's job. It can be part of the culture of organization, how they govern the system of work, the people's, how the leadership show up to support their system. It can be everyone's job as well.
I think that's some really good points in that. And Dave, you're quite passionate about changing that definition of governance. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Oh, look, governance is as I said earlier, it's such a misunderstood thing. I mean, governance, if you think about it, it started from we've had governance systems in organizations for centuries. And originally governance came from a position of hierarchy and information scarcity. So governance systems were really there to move information from the people that did the work to the people who made decisions about the way the work was done. And they were very different people in traditional organizations. And all that information had to be collected manually, it had to be massaged and collated and moved all manually from one group of people to another group of people. And over the years, that's broken down in organizations. We have flatter structures now. We have not information scarcity anymore. We have information overload in organizations, but we just haven't changed the way we do governance to match that new reality. So we've still got systems of governance that take information from one group of people, do a whole bunch of massaging on it, and give it to another group of people to make decisions on. And that doesn't fit the reality of organizations anymore. We've really got to have the people who are doing the work enabled to make the decisions about the work, because as you are fond of saying, Mr. Tony, close in person, place, and time. You have to be making those decisions close to the events. Otherwise, you've got these long delays built in. This is really about modernising governance to match the new reality of the way work gets done these days.
Yeah, and I think that also spans across into, you'd be hiding under a rock, and if you're watching this 10 years from now, we've just been through a pandemic, and it's not endemic yet, but it's certainly changed the frame. And if you put that against you against the governing systems, and we talk remote, and we bring remote into this now, which would really change the whole frame of thing, that exacerbated that whole close in person, place, and time. And how do we do that? Well, in changing the contrast, I guess, from what we're doing, what we see as traditional governance to what we're doing now. And Esther, what's your thoughts around that? I'd like to hear from you on that. On what's the contrast between what we're talking about doing now and what we've always done?
Well, I think Dave talked about some things that I think are kind of crucial in this, is that traditional governance came out of a time of deep hierarchy when there were assumptions that the people at the top of the organization were smart and knew things, and the people doing the work were not smart and didn't know things. And that is so far in the past for most organizations. Related to that, in most organizations, there's a certain bifurcation of knowledge that happens once an organization is over, 30 people, where the people with the titles or the people who were the founders understand the market, they understand the value proposition, they understand the customers, and they know all this contextual information. And the people who are actually producing the products or delivering the services know the edge, right? They know the front line, they know how to get things done, but very often they're missing that context. Likewise, as companies get bigger and things get more complex, the people who are making all the decisions tend to lose sight of what it takes to actually get the work done. So there's this bifurcation that happens. And in my mind, a lot of this governance is about reducing that bifurcation, not so that everybody knows everything, but so that there is intentional transparency to, I talk about it as increasing the diamond, making the diamond bigger, that shared information that enables people to make good decisions without, waiting for something to go all the way up and come all the way back down the hierarchy. And that's true for people on the making domain. And it's also true for people in the steering domain, because they will have more information about what it actually takes to get the work done.
Yeah. So if I take that and build on that a little bit and go a little bit further to the right now. So we've talked about, the what and the where of this stuff we're talking about, how we change the frame of it. But I guess, people sitting here, well, what do they really do? So what I want to talk a little bit about is what we've been building. What's the patterns and the things that are coming to the fore that we're enabling people. Farnaz, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't want to bother people with all the patterns and things we have built so far for now. But I think that the way that I see it is that we have 4 lenses. So we look at the governance with, we might call it pillars. We have different language, but for people who are new to this piece of work, that is, okay, if I look at it from the leadership perspective, what is required for governing an organization, for governing a group of people? What are the attributes that I need to bring in? What is missing? And even why we are doing this? Like we talk about the traditional ways of governing and the modernizing it, I think we can see that evolution through the leadership as well. What sort of leadership is required to do that? So we have this kind of lenses, as I said, like 4 pillars. We have information as another pillar that, okay, we talk about decision making, how the information should be gathered, who should have access to it, what informations are required. Like we in this era of digitalization of everything, there's a lot of information available even in the intranet of an organization. How the information is going to be consumed, for what purpose, is quite important. And then the other 2 lenses is about system of work. I think that language might be new to our audience as well. When we say system of work, they might think about a lot of different things, and we are not talking about digital systems or hardware. We are talking about group of people, or when people have a purpose to do something, they form systems, and these systems can be business units in our organization, can be like tribes. That those are the languages that other people might be more familiar. When we put all these systems of work together, how they are going to govern together, how they are going to meet their purposes. And the last pillar and lens that we have here is the transparency that Esther touched on, that kind of increasing or broadening that diamond, that again, through the C model, what we mean by transparency, what should be transparent and what shouldn't be. I think I like that part, that not everything across the organization should be transparent, but it's good to have some guideline and be quite visible about the constraint that we have, how the information should flow and go through that. I tried to provide a quick brief of those 4 lenses. Hopefully it was good enough.
No, that's great. And I think if you take those 4 lenses and you take what Esther was talking about before with the C model, which is the layering of the organization, and you merge those 2, you actually have this view that gives you both horizontal and vertical. And my team loves it when I talk about it, but it does connect that collaborative connective tissues of the organization and how the information flows. And you can see I'm all smiling because I'm very passionate.
Bingo.
Yeah. They call it bingo, yeah. So, but if you're bringing that together, what we've done is we've brought that together into a merged set of patterns, and you can see this lovely diagram behind me, which is what we call the remote governance map, shows how they all pull together. Dave, talk to us a little bit more about how they hang together, and who would use this stuff?
Who would use this? Everyone should use this. It's awesome. Before we talk about how it hangs together, I think it's also important to touch on the bit that you mentioned before, is how remote has changed things, because that was really important. The whole pandemic and the whole move to remote showed up so many gaps in traditional governance. Generally, in organizations, there are 2 systems of governance. There's a formal system of governance, all the reports and all that designed information flow, and then there's an informal system of governance where decisions actually get made. You talk to a lot of senior execs, they do not trust the reports that they're getting. They know that people are polishing the data. They know that people, want to make everything look good and so on. So they've all got their trusted set of people who they can go out and they can tap on the shoulder and they can say, hey, how are things really going? They can walk out onto the floor, they can feel the mood, they can do all of that sort of stuff. So there's this informal channel of governance and alongside the formal channel of governance. When we shifted to remote, a lot of that informal channel went away. Leaders couldn't go out onto the floor anymore. They couldn't necessarily tap the right people on the shoulder. They couldn't get that sense outside of the traditional governance of how the organisation was functioning. Mm-hmm. So we need to make this switch to really be much more intentional about the way we design the formal system of governance to replace that informal information flow. That was really the catalyst behind a lot of the stuff that we did. In terms of how all this hangs together, as Farnaz said, there's 4 pillars there, and they all work together. You can't just focus on one. You can't just focus on another. You've really got to focus on the system as a whole. And there's a set of patterns in this that basically flow you right from right round the circle. You can sort of see behind your shoulder there. Starting with, it doesn't really matter where you start, but you'll go around the circle and you'll end up back where you started, and you can keep moving around that circle just to keep refining the system. But all of these things play on each other and affect each other and form a whole system. And I think that's the other important thing. This is a whole system approach. It's not, we just want to fix transparency. You can't just fix transparency. In order to fix transparency, you've also got to fix your data. You've also got to fix your leadership. You've got to fix all aspects of the system in order to fix the system.
Yeah, that's a very good point. But playing into that, we talk about this being modularized.
Yeah.
So when I talk about that modularization, we've created the modularization to allow us to affect different parts of the organisation and the different parts of time or different parts of the governance. James, talk to us a bit about that modularization.
Yeah, so the way we've got this set up is to make sure that we don't try to boil the ocean. And while we have to do a bit of everything, we've got an initial module, which is kind of a really lightweight discovery piece to say, what are things like in the organisation now, and where do we want to start, and what do we want to prioritise? And then we can work through those modules one at a time. As Dave says, we can always come back to them, but essentially it's a way of saying, well, what are the problems here? Why are we here, and why are we trying to help? And then what is it that we'll do first? So after any module, we'll have actions come out of that, and they'll come back to be really practical and say, right, these are the things we're going to do now. These are the things we're going to do later. And then we can move on to another module to work through it. So we might say, hey, yeah, we need to have a look at everything, but let's start with transparency. And then we'll do a bunch of work around the SEAM model that Esther's spoken of. How are we going to broaden out that diamond to say, we don't want everyone to know everything, but we want to make sure that the people who are closest to the context of the work understand the context of the market or the broader strategy, and vice versa. So how do we make sure that there's an enabling and enhancing function is working really well to have a bridge or a nice big diamond between them. So we might start there and say, okay, what are we going to do? And then pretty soon people say, oh, well, the problem is everyone's looking at entirely different pieces of data. The people doing the work are looking at their workflows, and the people who are doing the strategy are looking at reports that don't come from that, they come from elsewhere. Okay, we better do some work around that. So you start to see how they connect together, but there are really specific actions that can come out of them. One sort of practical thing that's happening a lot at the moment is, say, bosses or leaders or managers around the place are saying, hey, I really want to get all my people back into the office. This pandemic is finished now, or finished enough now, or as finished as it's ever going to be now, and I don't know what my people are doing. So I want to get them back into the office. I'm not comfortable. I haven't been comfortable with what's going on, but I've had to deal with it. I don't have to deal with it anymore. I want my people where I can see them, just so I know what's going on, just so I can have those informal conversations. But But the reality of the world now is that's not going to happen. You're never going to go back to where we were before. You might go back a fair way. You might go back a long way to it, but you're never going to get back all the way to everybody in the office every day by default. And also, a lot of the best people out there, you're going to lose them because there are better ways that they prefer to work. So it's kind of saying, how do we actually help those people who don't know what's going on and perhaps don't have a sense of control? And that's for really valid reasons. They might be saying, well, actually, my organization is not working as well as it was before. So how do we actually help them? Well, we'll say, all right, how do we make it so as you do have a sense of control, but you also are able to let go a little bit and have a sense of, my organization has control even if I don't. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to lead in a different way. We need to start to have different conversations with our people. We need to increase that transparency so we do look at the same systems. So we can see, we do have an understanding of what our people are doing. And different meetings help that transparency. So there are some really practical things that we can recommend, as well as saying, hey, you need to be more transparent. It's like, how do you do that? Well, you talk to each other differently. You use different systems of workflow. You look at how do we propagate data through the organization. There's a whole lot of things that we can do to make sure that it does become specific, simple actions that we can take now, but B, it does have an impact and it helps people who need that help.
Yeah, so if I pick up on that a little bit, something you said there, James, if I'm sitting here listening to this and I'm the sort of person who's looking to affect a change, the question I have there is does this mean I've got to overhaul the whole of my governance system, or where do I start, or what's the entry point? And what's your thought on that, Esther?
Well, I think you start where you can, because we're, in a system, everything touches everything. So, if you change one aspect of it, it's going to have ripple effects throughout the organization. So we do recommend starting with the little assessment. But after that, you can really start anywhere. And it's a series of exercises for each of the pillars that a group of people, which they're often senior managers, but not always, workshop together. So they're presented with an issue or problem in the exercise, and they work on it. They come up with actions that will move them in the direction they want to go, that's coherent with their values. And then they have some work to do. And then they start on the next piece, right?
So I think the thing I'd like to add to that is that it's a living pattern, right? So would we do it once? Yes. Would we do it twice? Yes. Would we continue to do it? Yes, we would. And why would we do that? Because organizations have this organizational detritus, right? Everything's built upon everything to the point where everybody's just doing it because that's why they always did it. So what we work towards with putting this pattern together is something you can continually use, continuously sustain within your organization to ensure that you don't stagnate and that you continue to move with the pace of change. I mean, nobody needs to explain VUCA anymore to them, but if you look at it, VUCA is not just extrinsic outside of your organization and affecting your organization. Actually, if you look at what's happened with remote and all those types of things and the speed of change, it's intrinsic to your organization. And if you're not keeping up with the internal VUCA of your organization and the structures that you create around it, then you're going to be found wanting as well. So having said that, the thing around this is, I really think it's about why would people really want to use this? We know governance has had a bad name, but Dave, talk to me a little bit. Why would people want to actually tackle this if you were asking that question?
It's kind of like asking why would we want to breathe in and out? This is the way that organizations stay alive. I mean, you're right. Organizations have a lot of stagnant stuff in them, and governance is one of those things. One of the big problems organizations have got is that they've set a governance system in place years ago and go, well, that's the governance system. It's boring. I don't want to think about it. This is the way it's going to be. And then the business changes and the nature of the work that they do changes. So you need to govern that work in a different way. Using a pattern like this means that you've now got a system in place almost like a meta governance system. It's a governance system for your governance system. It's a pattern that lets you quickly and reasonably easily run through your governance and go, okay, well, what needs to change? So we don't need to stagnate. We've now got a way of making governance dynamic so that it can keep up with the changing nature of the work. Otherwise, you end up stagnant and getting eaten alive by small startups.
So if I build on that, we've talked about what we're aiming to fix. We've talked about, really the consequence of inadequate governance, and we've really looked around the fact that governance got a bad name. We've talked about what we've sort of created, but the thing for me is, so the question I want to ask each of you is, in your mind, what does good governance look like? So Farnaz, what do you see good governance looking like?
I think the good governance is something that helps your organization and your context and what you have. So it can be customized and adjusted based on what you're feeling and breathing. It's not something prescriptive. It's not a one-off way of doing things. It is flexible enough to reveal where you are, what you are experiencing, and provide some guidelines and signals to know, okay, what is next for your organization. And it takes you through that journey. I think that's really important because talking to small companies, middle size or large size, everyone struggles with the amount of change that they are practicing and facing every day. A good governance is kind enough, gentle enough to, take your hands and support you and take you to the next steps, because it's complex. It has lots of aspects, and it needs to kind of, it needs to be like a journey, rather than a one-off thing. That's something that I'm really passionate about.
That's great. And Esther, what's your thoughts adding to what Farnaz has said?
I go back to paraphrasing a quote from Donella Meadows to say the purpose of governance is to keep the parts and the whole functioning and self-organizing in a healthy way towards meeting the goals of the organization.
That's fantastic. I love that piece of it. I think I would add to that, if you're thinking about this and you're looking at this and you're thinking about governance and you've been through this journey that we've all been through, nothing strikes me harder than, working with a bunch of leaders from organizations, CEOs and CEOs, and one of them saying, one of the things we found out was we sent everyone home really quickly. We actually took a lot of the rules that we always used and we threw them out the window because we had to get people to work. And then we realized we didn't need them anymore. There were certain ones that we still had to enact and we still needed to keep, which is what Esther's saying, right? But this is a real actual CEO saying this. And what they've done is they've gone back and they've started to look at that and they've started to think about, well, why do we need those things? And the reality of it is that there's so many layers of that detritus, again, that people put that rule in place 100 years ago, but people are still doing it because it was right. James, what do you think good governance looks like?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, right? So I remember at the start of the COVID pandemic, I was working with a team, and one day they got told they had to go home, but we needed to keep working. We just can't be in this building anymore. It was a development team. A whole bunch of developers picked up their boxes, picked up their hard, big computers, their dev boxes, and took them home. And then they were plugging them into their Wi-Fi, and basically their office was as far as that cord could reach from wherever their router was at home. Yeah. And they were working suddenly at home. Now, 2 weeks ago, they could have done the same thing and could have done it just as effectively. There was nothing stopping them. It certainly wouldn't have been allowed. And it turned out that team was just as effective through the entire pandemic than they were before, right? So it's just a nice little illustration of what you're talking about. But for me, what we've tried to do and what I've learned is good remote agile governance is not one size fits all. It's not saying here's the rules for the organization. There are rules for the organization, especially around culture and ethics, but there are sometimes it's governance is saying this part of the organization needs to be governed like so. This other part of the organization needs to be governed differently. But it's also governance that works for the people. So it should be making the people in the organization happy and rewarding them appropriately. You know, there are some people who come in and do similar jobs every day and can come in and, hey, part of my job is doing a similar task and picking those tasks up and doing them really effectively. I'm really proud of being able to do that well, and they should be rewarded for doing that. There are other people who come in and want to be able to work or are working on, you know, say design thinking problems, or they're part of agile teams where they are, or scrum teams where they're trying to address a problem that they've defined the problem reasonably well, but they don't have a clue what the solution is yet. So they need to be rewarded for doing their jobs well, and their jobs really different. You measure those in different ways. So it's about addressing the right problem in the right way. It's about helping the right people in the right way and rewarding them. I think those are really important aspects of it. And that also, one more point that I want to make, at the risk of running on and on, which I sometimes do. So there are people who are really comfortable working remote because they're introverts, or they are really happy, they're digital natives and don't feel introverted when they are working from home because that's how they interact with people all the time. There are other people who are really lost and need help and support from their leaders working at home, and come into the office looking for that social connection, and then they find there's no one there. So a lot of what we've done with trying to organize teams in remote AF and broadly over the last couple of years is trying to grapple with that, right? And the governance is a key part of it. It's not just about one size fits all, even within the same team. It's about how do we make this work for everybody and make a team feel connected, make an organization feel connected, and make sure that we're all heading in the same direction. So those are the sort of problems. So good governance means we think about how can we reward people, teams, how can we incentivize them to make the right decisions when we're solving really different problems in a really complex world and may or may not be in the same place.
Thanks, James. And I think that leaves you, Dave. And, you know, I left you last so that, you know, you get the final word on it, but we've taken all the words. So
you've taken all the words. I do want to pick up on something that James said, and that, you know, it's amazing how quickly a lot of those organizational constraints melted away in the face of a crisis. You know, a lot of organizations have been, you know, there's massive security problems around working from home. We can't possibly put teams in because, you know, there's all these constraints and logistical problems. And we had that up and working within days. Rather than the usual years. So it's amazing how a crisis can really make change. In terms of my last word on what good governance looks like, I like to think about really good governance as a kind of a set of enabling constraints. One of the reasons governance gets a bad name is because people see constraints as being limiting. You know, they limit what I can do. But a really good set of enabling constraints, it doesn't limit you, it focuses you. It focuses you on doing the things that need to be done to align with strategy and with purpose and all of those things as well. And I think that's the function of good governance is aligning the organisation around its purpose.
I was going to ask a question, and I was going to ask a question of what we've learned through this process, but I don't think I need to ask that because you've all just answered that for me. What I would just add to that and add to what you've just said is that the patterns that we have created and the system that we've created, we've been beta testing it. We're about to release this. When you see this clip, it'll be out. And the reality is we know they work. That's one thing we have learned because we have had a chance to test these with organizations. And we would encourage you to get involved. We would encourage you to start thinking about how can you change that lens of governance within your organization. So in saying that, we're very close to the end of the time. Farnaz, how can people get involved with us?
They can reach out in the RAF community and let us know if they are interested about learning about it, being part of the test group that we have. If they would like to hear about our learning through the process, we are happy to share as well. That can be one way of getting involved.
Brilliant. Team, what's next for the team? What's next for the team? Because we've sort of come to the end of our journey and we're trying to make up ideas to, you know, make reasons to keep meeting, keep working because we love working with each other, right? But on a serious note, what's our next focus? Who'd like to grab that one? Free for all.
I reckon
Come on,
Esther should answer it.
Yeah, we've come a long way, but there's still so far to go.
Thoughts, Esther? I can
Esther, what do
see.
you think?
I think our next step is to get this out into the world and into people's hands. So they're trying it out. And, sometimes people think governance is just senior managers, but I think these pillars are applicable at the department level and the team level. So don't limit it to just, if you're a CEO. I think these are all patterns that can help you have your part of the system function more effectively. So that's, I think the next big thing is just get this out into the world and learn what we can from continuing to have it out in the field.
Yeah, and great. And for me, it's everything you've said. And then for the one of being a bit of a Lord of the Rings nerd, but the Eye of Sauron then focuses on funding, because for us, we've touched on many of the patterns, and these will touch those patterns, but there are some direct focuses that we want on funding as well, because funding affects so much of the system. So we'll be looking at that as well. Look, it's been great to have you as a group together, just to chat around this and get this out into the world. If you're watching this and you'd like to get involved, please, remoteaf.co. Click the contact button or click the community button and join us. We'd love to hear from you. If you're listening to this cast and you want to keep it running, subscribe, because we'd love to keep this thing going. All the remote things for All Things Remote. Team, thanks so much for having you on today.
Thanks, Tony. Good to see everybody.
Tony.